Welcome everyone. This is Caesar with Inspire Our Movement. So very glad that you could join us. So today we're starting an entirely new series. It's a series on servanthood. And we have none other than my friend, Miss Ann Taylor, who is a founder of the IDignity Non-Profit Organization right here in Central Florida. And she's going to share a ton of information with us as we get into our discussion. So with that, I'd like to open up by maybe allowing you a little bit of an opportunity to share with us a little bit about yourself, any personal information or background type of information that you want to share with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was born and raised in the Midwest, in Minneapolis, suburb of Minneapolis. So I came here right after graduation. I went to college at a very small school up in Duluth, Minnesota. Okay. And I was so cold, I looked for a warm place to come and land. And my first job was on Park Avenue in Winter Park, Florida, and I thought I had arrived in the promised land. It was so beautiful and just fell in love with the climate, the people, everything about Orlando and Winter Park. So I worked in ministry for my first 35 years. Loved it, did youth ministry, did mission, and that really prepared me and led me to the position I have today. I never thought I would be a professional fundraiser, nor did I think I would be on staff with IDignity, but these last 5 years have just been phenomenal, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So as we dive into all things IDignity, tell us a little bit about the inception of IDignity, the idea of IDignity. Of course, I have volunteered, so I'm a little bit more in tune, but for folks watching this video and unfamiliar, that may be living here in Central Florida and are really unawares of what IDignity actually does. Tell us a little bit about the initial idea of it and how that came to be.
I was working at the Cathedral Church of St. Luke, a large downtown church, and we were approached by our neighbors across the street from St. James Catholic Cathedral. And at that time, they had a very small program serving homeless people through the ministry of St. Vincent de Paul. And part of their ministry was helping people get ID. And this was back in the day when it was $3, it jumped to $5. Well, it jumped to $10, and they knew they needed help. The need was growing. The financial commitment was more than they could sustain. And so they came across the street and met with my pastor and I, and they said, "Would you help us? We don't know what this looks like, but let's put our heads together." Well, as God would have it, down the street, the Methodists, the Presbyterians were having the same conversation. And so we decided to gather the 5 downtown churches, the Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Catholic, and Episcopal churches, all sent representatives to sit around a table in a conference room or in a parish hall and talk about what would this look like. But the first thing we talked about is there must be an organization that does this. Somewhere there must already be that great nonprofit doing this. So that was the first part of our research. And we came up with absolutely nothing. So we knew that we needed to figure out a plan to serve people. And at first it was just going to be an identification. It was going to be the government issued Florida ID or driver's license. And then it became very apparent that hand in hand with that, we needed to have the opportunity to get a birth certificate from out of state, a social security card, and thank goodness we did, because now those are the supporting documents every U.S. citizen needs to get their license renewed. So we met for from October to May, to the beginning of the spring, and we had meetings with people in various positions, government agencies, nonprofits, and we would interview them and ask them what their input was. What did they think it would look like? What did they think we would need to offer? And we would gather this information and we'd meet again, and by the end of May, right before Memorial Day in 2008, we launched our very first IDignity event. We called them events. And it was really formed after Homeless Service Connect had this wonderful day of service where lots of nonprofits would show up and meet the needs of homeless people. So it was kind of based on that model. only this was just for identification. We had no idea how many people would show up. We thought, we knew a few. We thought maybe 12 people. There were over 500 people that first morning. The line was so long, and we had capacity to serve about 250. So we were turning people away, not only that first month, but every single month after for the first few years. We had no idea how great the need was. Honestly, Caesar, when we started, we thought we might be doing this a few months, and then we'd probably solve this problem. Because when you don't have ID, they refer to themselves as a ghost. Nobody notices them. They look right through them. They cannot prove who they are. So we had no idea the need was so great.
So in that vein, can you tell us, obviously you've already highlighted some of the things that IDignity actually does, but from a service provision standpoint, yes, the identification, but can you maybe elaborate a little bit more as to what are the services rendered?
Well, primarily we help people once again prove who they are. So we offer an intake. We get all the basic information from that. We will order their out-of-state birth certificate. We will apply for their Social Security card or documentation supporting that. And we will help them get their Florida ID card or driver's license. And in 2010, you probably remember the Real ID Act starting. And so now every single person, you and I, all have to have that little gold star on our identification. And what that means, that was part of the Real ID Act. And that means that we have proved who we are. So we're getting back in the system. We've showed our birth certificate or passport. We've showed our Social Security card. And we have made sure, they are making sure that our name is correct on all of those documents. So everything matches. And so what we help clients do is gather those documents, and with those documents, then get their ID. What happens a lot of times is that those documents don't match. So you might have been born, I was born Ann Mary Reynolds, but through marriage, my name is changed to Ann Mary Taylor. So I had to show why my name changed. It was changed through marriage, so I had to show a marriage certificate. And so if you're living on the streets or suffering from mental illness, or you've been born on a farm with a midwife, you have no idea maybe how to get these documents. And a lot of times you need that legal assistance, that legal advocate who will be your voice and will help you sort out this incredible mess. Oftentimes it is a mess. And so that's what we offer our clients.
And it's daunting.
It is.
It's a daunting task. Obviously, I've had we've met before, right?
Yes.
With my wife, I've actually attended one of the IDignity events myself, and got a very sort of broad demonstration of what goes on. Can you share for our audience what that IDignity event is structured, or how it's structured? I remember the stations and the different parties that are there. But can you share a little bit on that as to the makeup of the event itself?
Absolutely. And let me just note, this is all pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So pre-March 2020, we would gather at the Salvation Army, and we would serve about 200 to 250 people once a month. We needed 135 volunteers to serve that day. And we would bring together the government agencies that all helped putting these pieces of the puzzle together. So we would have the Florida Vital Statistics, Orange County Vital Statistics, who could print the Florida birth certificate right there. We would have the Social Security Administration, so they could look and see if you had a Social Security number, if it was valid, and they would apply for your card if you needed a new one. We would have the Department of Motor Vehicles on site, and they would print your Florida ID or your driver's license. Now, what we didn't do, or what we still do not do, is we do not change your status. So if you've never had a driver's license, but you come to us and you say, I really want to learn how to drive, we will give you we will help you get your Florida ID, but then you'll have to take the next steps to get that driver's license. So we don't change your status if you are not a U.S. citizen and you want to become a U.S. citizen. We do not do immigration. So we will definitely refer you to one of our partnering organizations and help you get that figured out. But we just serve U.S. citizens. And a recent credible study states that 1 in 10 U.S. adult citizens do not have access to their government-issued identification. And that is, in Orange County, that's about 117,000 people today. So that number grows every single day as people move into our county and our state. And the number just continues to grow and grow and grow. So the need still, 12 years later is so amazingly great that we kept thinking that line has got to diminish at some point, and it hasn't. So on these once a month event days, we would bring the government agencies together along with the volunteers and serve about 200 to 250 clients. And it's like a wonderful maze that our clients would go through. They'd go through intake, and then they'd sit at the legal team, and the legal team would help them sort out what they had, what they didn't have, what they were going to need. And from legal, they would go to the next station. It might be out-of-state birth certificate. Right. I was born in Minnesota, so I would have to have them apply for a Minnesota birth certificate. And from there, you would go to Social Security. And from there, you would go out to the Flow bus, which is the Florida Licensing on Wheels. And that is the bus that would actually produce the ID or the driver's license. So it was a wonderful community event of people coming together, helping people, get over this hurdle, this entrapment that they had been in, and the joy and the relief on the clients' faces made it all worth it. So worth it. The staff would refer to these days as the best day of the month. Something we all look forward to. You can feel a very
positive energy for sure.
Yes.
So with the thousands of people serviced in basically a dozen years and counting, right? I'm thinking that maybe a one or two stories of inspiration for you guys that are obviously rendering the service and looking for impactful change in the community. It has to be very much inspirational when you get, a success story. A true success story of how you've impacted somebody's life just by making them dignifiably recognizable. Do you know, or can you think of maybe a name or possibly a story, if you don't want to give full identification, that touched you in that sort of way?
So many stories. We have served over 23,000 to date clients. That's a unique client. Some clients come back. So I'm glad you asked me that. I just wanted to say IDignity and the name. So the ID is what we do, but we do it with such dignity and love. And that is really part of the core mission and value of who we are. So part of what we got to do at these wonderful monthly events is sit down and talk to clients, and we got to hear their story. And one day I sat down next to this young woman, and I just, was making conversation. Sometimes the wait is particularly long to get your ID, but she was at the end of this wonderful journey. She had gotten in line at 4:30 that morning, so now it's, creeping up at 10 o'clock. So I sat down and I said, "How you doing?" And I expected her to say, "Oh, I'm so hot," or "I'm so tired," or "I'm so hungry." She said, "I am so happy." She said, "In fact, I'm just giddy. I can barely sit in this chair. I'm so happy." And I said, "Tell me about that." And she said, "Well, I have this daughter, and she's, 2 years old. She goes to daycare, and every day I go to pick her up, and they ask me to show my ID. And I don't have ID. But I was incarcerated, so I have those papers. And I have to show my prison papers in front of the other parents in line. And there's so much shame that comes along with that. But today I'm going to get in line to get my daughter with my ID, and I'm going to be like every other parent. And that just makes me so happy. And she had been without her ID for years. And that's just one story of so many. I think of Dana, who had come to us after 17 years without identification. She, at 17, had left home, homeless teenager, lost her purse, or it was stolen. So she's on the streets without identification. And she looked at me and she said, Ann, there's only two things you can do while living on the streets without identification. One is prostitution and one is drugs. She said, I tried prostitution. It was so horrifically terrible. I didn't last. So I became a drug dealer. And finally, I was arrested. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I got clean and because I got my GED. And now I'm starting my life over. But she said, it was coming up on my time to be released. And it dawned on me, I still didn't have my identification. She said, you know what? I'd rather stay in prison than get out without an ID, because I knew I'd go right back to that life. And then one of the inmates said, have you heard about IDignity? She said, no, what is that? And he said, it's this great organization and they help you get your ID. She said, no way. He said, yes, there's a van that comes. Get on that van at 4 a.m. You've got to be one of the first in line, and they'll help you. And so she did. She got on the van. She showed up at IDignity before dawn. She's waiting in line. And she was born in Florida, which is always such a good thing, because we could get her Florida birth certificate. We got her Social Security. Yep. That day, she left with everything she needed to get a job. That was a Thursday. By Friday, she was able to apply within the prison system. They were applying for jobs because they want them to be released with employment, but you have to have that ID first.
Right.
And so she was hired upon release on Friday, and she got out on Monday and started working for $12 an hour.
Wow.
So I still keep in touch with Dana. She's doing great. She owns her own business now in Colorado, and she is so happy. And she said, I'll never forget you guys at IDignity. She said, I was a nobody and I left there a somebody.
Powerful.
It was. And
powerful indeed.
Yeah, so many stories like that.
So why, other than homelessness, which I think is somewhat understandable, that somebody that has succumbed to homelessness because of mental illness or possibly because of a vice of some type, which is a sickness in and of itself, they may find themselves without any sort of proper documentation to get their feet off the ground. But what other forms, can someone, legal citizen of the United States, wind up being in this manner?
It could happen to any of us. We have helped people who are of means, and because, in fact, several people contact us to help their elderly parents because they need their identification to get that medicine refilled. And if you're not driving, like my dad, for instance, he's not driving, so he thought, why should I renew my driver's license? Well, he didn't stop to think he still needs that identification. So a lot of elderly people find themselves without their license renewed, and it goes back to that real ID. So back in the day, you didn't need to show your birth certificate, your Social Security card, 2 pieces of mail that all had the same name on it in order to get your license or ID renewed. So that's where the crux comes from. It's, you don't know where to get your birth certificate. Several of our clients or people that come to us were adopted. Right. Maybe they never had a birth certificate. We've had to help them create a birth certificate. It's called a delayed birth certificate, where we petition to the state for them to actually get that document they've never had. Right. There are just hundreds of reasons people would not have the right documents in order to renew their state ID. A lot of times it's that name that got put on the birth certificate that is not the name they used going through life. And then there's this problem because the name doesn't match.
Social Security, other
Yes.
forms of documentation.
So client Tammy came to us. On her birth certificate, it was Tammy. Okay, and in 4th grade, you get your Social Security card at the time, and she signed it Tami with a little heart above her, I. And she went on through life with Tami. Okay, so now she goes to renew her license, and she pulls out her birth certificate, and it doesn't match. Now what do? Now you need an advocate like IDignity who walks alongside you, brings the legal representation to help you sort that out. So just all kinds of stories like that. We often say it's a catch-22 because it's the one thing a person cannot do all by yourself. You would think that I could prove who I am, but I could sit here all day and tell you that I'm Ann Taylor, but without the documentation, how am I going to prove that to you? So I get caught in this terrible struggle that I can't get out of alone. So that's where I think.
And it's something that we who have proper documentation can easily take for granted.
Absolutely.
Except for, golly, if I don't have proper documentation, I can't open up a bank account, I can't ask for social services if I require them. It seems like every doorway is closed before it even cracked open.
Right, you can't rent a car, you
Can't rent
can't
a
get
car.
on an airplane, you can't
so
even
limited.
return a shirt at Target without your ID, right? There's so many communities, gated communities, places that you have to show that ID, right? And more now in our current culture, we have to have that identification on us. People like you and I all the time. So it's becoming more and more of a need. And for so many years, I never pulled out my birth certificate. Have you ever looked at your birth certificate to make sure it says male and not female?
Nope.
That's a problem too. In fact, our board chair didn't find out until he was in his mid-30s that his birth certificate said female instead of male. It took him 2 weeks to get that sorted out. And we've never expected any of these documents to be the birther of identification. A birth certificate is to show where and when you were born, right? We never thought it would play into part of the puzzle of proving who you are. So it's an interesting niche that we have.
So you alluded to this a little bit earlier. When you guys missionally went about this, you expected a very small window of time to possibly cater to the Central Florida area specifically. Sure, we'll do this for a couple of years. I don't even know that you had that in mind, but you thought of it as something finite, that it would eventually phase out as you've now made sure that all of the folks that were requiring documentation properly had it. Based on what you've alluded to already, not only has your region or your geographic area sort of broadened over the years, but the need seems to keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we go. Why is that?
Well, I think the Real ID Act really plays into it because for the first time you went to renew your license, you could do it online. So if your license expired in 2018, you could do it one time online, 2018, you could do it online. So now you're at that point where you can't do it online. You have to go in and you have to have those documents. So people now have to have a birth certificate, where maybe up until this point they didn't have to show their birth certificate. Now, even to rent an apartment or a house in many cases, you have to show a birth certificate showing that you are a U.S. citizen. So the need is great because of the current climate we're in. Identification has become a really big deal, and all of us need identification to just go about our daily work. If I want my prescription refilled, I have to have my proper identification. If I want to go to the bank, we interviewed a president of the bank, and she said, if I walked downstairs today and wanted to access my account, I couldn't, because the government regulates our laws, and the law states that you have to show a government-issued ID to access that bank account. So we have veterans in our community that don't have an ID. They have money going into their account every month, but they can't access that. So it's really a problem that so many of us don't even think about. I mean, I didn't think about it. When my pastor asked me to be on this team, I thought, sure, what's the big deal? Just go to the DMV.
Small commitment.
Yeah, get it taken care of. I was so ignorant. I was so clueless. And I think that's the majority of people. I've never struggled without having identification. Have you ever struggled?
Fortunately not.
Fortunately not, right. But I do know that minute of panic when I can't put my hand on my ID. Maybe I stuck it in a pair of pants and I don't, that instant of panic, and that's what our clients live with every single day. We had a client who got his ID after years and years of trying to sort this out by himself. In fact, most of our clients try to get this sorted out by themselves, and they come to IDignity as a last resort.
Right.
And he's an educated young man, very intelligent, just took every avenue trying to get this worked out. He was adopted and very tangled background. But the day he got his identification, he sat there and stared at it. And finally he looked up with tears in his eyes and he said, "You didn't just give me my identification today. You gave me my life back." He said, "Now I'm free. I am free to walk into a grocery store, and if they ask for my ID, I can hand it to them. I don't have to live with this fear. It's like this cloud hanging over you every day of who's going to ask me for my ID? And what is that going to lead to if I can't prove it?"
So one of the things, and you've alluded to this previously, as far as that initial brainstorming, the processing that you guys did to get to where you are. What I find most, or I marvel at, is getting so many different entities, whether it be the local churches, obviously this being a nonprofit, governmental agencies of all sorts, to collaborate. That had to be an incredibly daunting task to get so many folks to sort of buy in and create these events, which really expedite a process that you mentioned could take an inordinate amount of time. So if you could maybe share some thoughts on this collaborative process and how this sort of model can lend itself to other possible collaborations in kindness, to impact change in our communities, because that's essentially what you're doing.
It was absolutely a grassroots organization of people that came together. I think one of the reasons it...
And I'm sorry, I'll throw in also the incredible staff of volunteers on top of that.
Yes, and that goes back to the beginning. Because IDignity was not the brainchild of one person, but of 34 people who represented hundreds of people. I mean, I represented a church community of hundreds of people that went to the cathedral, whereas every church. So right away, 34 people multiplied. They got their friends and their churches and their civic groups to come and volunteer, to come and be part of this. So number one, we started off with a whole lot of ownership. It wasn't just one executive director with a great idea. It was a team of people. And it was a team of people that bought into this mission and had ownership of this mission and wanted to make sure this mission succeeded. So from day one, we have had more volunteers than we need. In fact, we've had to turn volunteers away month after month. Too many volunteers. I mean, who's got that problem?
That's incredible.
But it's because those 34 people just grew into hundreds of people. And the neat thing is, a lot of those volunteers are still around today. A lot of those people still volunteer on a weekly basis. So now we've left the monthly event and we're serving weekly. And again, our volunteers have come back. The community support is just absolutely astronomical. I mean, just number one, getting the government agencies to buy into this model. That was not easy. In fact,
I can't imagine.
We literally had to camp outside their door and wait for them to talk to us and sell them on the idea that we wanted them to come to a homeless shelter and bring a staff person and their expensive computers and equipment and give a day to serve homeless people. And that didn't go over real well at the beginning. But once they caught the vision and they saw that if we all work together to solve this problem, we can do it more efficiently.
I mean, it really is incredible. Having been part of it, it's something that you can take for granted if you're going in there for the first time because it's already sort of set up. But that was my initial impression when I came to my wife to the event that we did in Osceola and the one that you showed us in Salvation Army. Wow, how did this happen? Like, how did all these people buy in collectively to do something good for the community? Because it's so hard, right, to get everybody to be on the same page.
It is, but it goes back to those 6 months where we met, we gathered, we interviewed community leaders, we brought that information back, and we kept talking about what we needed. And so the model that we launched back in May of 2008 really still is the model up until COVID hit. Mm-hmm. It was a model that worked really well. And again, because it wasn't one person, it was many people coming together. Now, it took one person to begin to steer this big operation. And our executive director has kept this organization with the idea of excellence through the years. And we're very, very fortunate that we've had him leading and guiding us. But he always is quick to say, it wasn't just me. I was a part of a group.
Big conglomerate of people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I know IDignity currently is in 4 or 5 counties? Orange County,
we are in
Seminole,
Osceola and Volusia.
4 counties. Mm-hmm. Where does IDignity go from here? What are some aspirational goals for the nonprofit?
We would absolutely love to be in every city that's about the size of Orlando. So Orlando is a good size. We don't think this would work really well in a very, very large city like Miami. Sure. And it wouldn't be right to have it in a really small town like Frostproof, Florida. And
why is that, if you don't mind me asking?
Just because you need the collaboration of the government agencies, okay. And because small towns just don't have everybody right there. You might have to go to a larger part of the state for that. So we would love to be in every city about the size of Orlando, which is about 84 cities across the U.S. Mm-hmm. It's going to take us a while to get there. We call Orlando the mothership, and we have to we have to make sure that Orlando is financially sustained and healthy, and which it is. But we have to make sure we're as sturdy and as stable as possible in order to branch out. Okay. And we're going to get there, and it is on the horizon because, again, the need is absolutely in every city across this country. And there is a group meeting. There are a few other groups in other parts of the country doing identification, not exactly like we're doing it, but they're starting to talk on Zoom and really look at what a national coalition would look like or a national alliance would look like. So,
are these entities elsewhere that you can sort of tap into for really complex cases here, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. They're doing what we're doing. Honestly, I think IDignity probably has handled the most complicated cases that you could ever imagine.
I mean, in cases where obviously you have to go past state lines, such as what you were mentioning before, somebody that was born in Minnesota.
We can do that. We do that. We do that right here. Absolutely. Okay. We've figured out the complexity of every state, and one of our board members always says, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, like the old State Farm group, but we've probably seen every single challenge you could throw at us. There was one client that was found behind a dumpster, naked, having been beat up with amnesia. They had absolutely no idea who he was. He had no idea who he was. And through collaboration of a DNA sample and IDignity, he was able to get his ID. We had
Unbelievable.
this amazing attorney, Jackie Dowd. You can look up that story in the Orlando Sentinel files, and they did a beautiful article on that. But it's something like that, that's one of the most challenging cases imaginable, and we can figure it out. It takes almost detective work to figure out the different pieces. Mm-hmm. And our legal team is absolutely amazing. Years of doing this has really played in our favor.
Thank you for sharing that. So by happenstance, really, just by chance, I happened to attend an event also hosted by IDignity in downtown. And it was a homeless memorial service through our mutual friend, Miss Teresa, which we were talking about before we started. I have to honestly say that is one of the most compassionate and dignifying events that I've ever been a part of. We were, I guess, one of the folks that had a candle and had to go to the front of the church and represent a deceased homeless person. Share a little bit about that with our audience and how that just came to be.
I'm so glad you asked me about that, Caesar, because that's a national night of remembering people who have experienced homelessness and have died on the streets. And Orlando community wanted to be a part of that national night of remembrance. It happens around the longest night of the year, which is in many parts of the country the coldest night, one of the coldest nights. And IDignity began sponsoring this several years ago with HSN Homeless Services Network. And we are very proud to say that there has not been one Jane or John Doe in the last 10 years, thanks to IDignity. But we, with the help of other nonprofit organizations, we gathered the names of the deceased. And anybody that knows somebody can put a friend that they know of that died on the streets on the list. And we compile this beautiful list, and each name is read out loud. A person has a candle lit for that person's name, and a bell is rung. And so as their name is being read, the candle dings and rings, and the person walks forward with a candle. Because if you're living on the street, chances are you haven't had a funeral, and chances are nobody even knew that when you died, you probably died alone. And so to have this day that we're remembering these people and recognizing them and giving them, again, the dignity and the respect that they deserve. Mm-hmm. And this year, we're doing it again. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be outside. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be at Heritage Square Park, which is right outside the front doors of the the Orange County Regional History Museum. It's right smack downtown on Central Boulevard. And we will all gather there, and each name will be read. A bell will be rung, and instead of candles, we're going to have a Christmas tree, and there's going to be a dove ornament and with the homeless person's name that will be hung on the tree. So it's going to be a really beautiful visual and a good reminder of those names.
And if I recall correctly, last year, having participated, it was a list of almost 130 names.
Yes.
In Orange County alone.
Yeah, there will be over 100 names, yeah. And it's open to the
surreal.
public.
Really
it
does.
It does. When we first started doing this, we asked a client who had just gotten his ID, why was it so important for you to get your ID today? And he said, so I don't die a John Doe. And Michael and I looked at each other and we said, wow, I never thought of that. And he said, my family's in Chicago. I live here alone. And when I die, I want to have identification on me so they can locate a family member so they know that I passed. Well, he did. He passed that following spring. And we were able to get his body flown to Chicago because we were able to contact his sister. And if you're homeless, that's what you're thinking about, which is so sad. Mm-hmm. So sad.
So as we begin to wrap up our beautiful talk today. We are still currently experiencing a global pandemic, and I am sure that daily function has quite changed, right? There's a new normal that we're all adapting to. Can you share a little bit about how you guys are doing what you do, the good work that you do, despite the conditions that we're currently in?
We are so very, very fortunate that after having been closed for 4 months, on August 4th, we opened our doors to Jackie's Place, which is a small house that sits right across the parking lot from us. And Jackie was our founding attorney and just a huge advocate for the homeless, loved being their attorney. And so we opened the doors to Jackie's Place. Instead of serving once a month, we serve 3 times a week from 8:30 to 12:30 by reservation. And a lot of what we do now is over the phone and remote. So we do the intake that they used to sit across the table and we used to write it all down. Now they're being interviewed by one of our volunteer clients, doing a remote interview, typing that information into the form. They make an appointment online at IDignity.org, and they come to their appointment time. We do a quick screening of temperature, make sure they have a mask, and then they go into the little place that looks kind of like a mini tax collector's office with a plexiglass, so the volunteers on one side, the clients on the other. The client can see the monitor, so they can read along to see everything is spelled right and all the information is getting uploaded correctly. And it's different in the fact that government agencies are not on site, but we still are in communication and working hand in hand with them. In fact, we've had the vital statistics on a Zoom call while the client is here and the volunteer is here. We've had the tax collector's office hop on a Zoom call so they can prove the identity. So we're overcoming those hurdles virtually now, as we all have to. And then we give the client a voucher. They have to go to the tax collector's office. They have to make an appointment, which we help them do. They bring the voucher, which means that we're paying for their services. So IDignity services are free to anybody that has a need. We estimate each client costing IDignity about $300 on average, and about 4 hours volunteer time. Now, some of our clients are less than that, but some of our clients have taken years to overcome the complication of their case. One client took 3 years, and that would be thousands of dollars in legal time. Alone, right. So our services, the good news is we're serving clients, and we're serving 20 to 30 a day. So we're back up in that 200 plus range of serving 200 clients every single month. And in some ways, it's better because it's not overwhelming. Walking into a huge gymnasium and seeing 300 plus people can be very overwhelming if you're not used to being around people. So the smaller, intimate service really works well, and it's very fortunate. So many nonprofits aren't able to pivot like we were able to, and as quickly. So, I thank our donors, and I thank our creative legal team and our amazing program director who said, we're not going to stop serving clients. We're going to figure out a way to do it, and it's working beautifully. It really is.
Well, thank you twofold. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for what you do on a day-to-day basis. That's why we wanted to reach out to you.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad that you accepted. Everybody needs to know. If you live in Central Florida, please look them up online, IDignity.org. Get to know when their events are, when those things pick up, obviously past the COVID-19 pandemic. And reach out to Ms. Taylor or anybody affiliated with the organization. This is good people doing good work, necessary hard work, and really changing and impacting people's lives. So with that, I'd like to take us to a close. But thank you again so much for everything that you do, and I look forward to maybe having another sit down hopefully a few years later.
That'd be awesome.
Maybe not that long, but certainly into the future and kind of get an update on what you guys are doing and how everything else is going and how many more lives you're impacting.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor. So we're very thankful for Ms. Ann Taylor, who gave us a tremendous discussion today on everything IDignity. I hope you really enjoyed this content. Please tune in to our YouTube channel. Look for our logo. We're working on 3 separate series as we speak, and we're going to have a lot of relevant content for you guys, which I know you're going to love and definitely be inspired by. Also look for us on Instagram, Facebook, as we're constantly putting other material that you won't find on our YouTube channel there and is also very relevant and pertinent to everything health and everything wellness. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.